Right. So sitting up in your chair and just giving yourself a few moments to get that feeling of sinking down. Rubbing your hands together. And tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. And your shoulder, arms. The side. Belly. And finally your legs. And then changing your posture, sitting back, looking for this nice feeling of settling back, releasing, letting go. Letting go is an interesting term. It's an awkward term because I think it suggests something easy when in fact it's not. But at the same time, it is a very appropriate term. You're just letting yourself drop back. And you may need to sort of shuffle around a little bit to accomplish that. But eventually it becomes a process that you recognize internally in both body and mind. Don't hurry the process. Just allow the sort of settling in to work for you. Somebody once said that this is a sitting meditation. They said that it's like placing a jar of muddy water on a table, and you just leave it there. The mud just slowly starts to settle. You can block that process in various ways, consciously and unconsciously. And you can start to remove those blocks in one way or another. But you can't actually speed up the process. You can't make it happen faster. If you pick up the jar and give it a shake, then it's not going to do any good. Breathe in, your posture, feeling your weight sinking into the chair. All things that you can learn to focus your attention on. Remembering always that the more we practice these ideas, the more we hardwire the pathways through which they work in body and mind, through the nervous system and so on. And so the more accessible these things become to us. Like if you have a shed at the bottom of your garden and you don't go there very often, chances are the path grows over. It gets a bit uneven, maybe the grass grows up to it and so on and so forth, which means that it's always a bit of a kind of trial to get to it. If you go there every day, then it helps the path to remain clear. There's still work to do on the path, but it's more immediately accessible to you. And in time, you learn to be able to walk that path, maybe even at night, and it just becomes a kind of automatic response for you. So now coming back up to the upright position again, looking to refine your posture. In particular, just having your weight a little bit forwards. Just note whether your back's okay with this. If it is tightening up a bit, then you may need to sit back. But if you can stay a little bit forwards, that's fine. But remember that if your back does start to tighten up, sitting forwards doesn't really help, because with a tight back, it's going to be difficult to do the exercises anyway. So you must well sit back and take that support, use that support. And then just beginning to turn your head from side to side, feeling the movement. There's a sort of cycle of movement, and at the changing point, everything seems to slow down and then return. There's a reflection of this idea in our breathing, if it suits you, to look at your breathing at any point. That we breathe in, and then there's almost a sort of slight pause, and you breathe out, and there's a slight pause. You're not holding your breath. It's just a sort of moment of gathering in. Those moments become really important because they're the transitions from one movement to another, from one stage of one movement to the next. And it's useful to recognize the overall feel of those moments, because they're quite frequently the moments when change occurs. Now, hands in front of your shoulders. As always, this is not just about preparing your body. You know, it's good to work with the joints of the body in this way, get them moving and mobilized. Remember that joints just naturally stiffen up when they're not being used. Sometimes that's because the synovial fluid in the joints has just thickened and it will thin out with movement and going forwards. It's also worth bearing in mind that in the warmer weather, joints can swell up, and that too can restrict the movement of your joint. But again, a little bit of movement gets the blood flowing, and that's a significant part of how our bodies cool themselves, taking the heat away from these areas. Down to your side, but it's also preparing your attention, your mind, noticing those pauses, perhaps, those transitions from one movement to another. Continuing that process of the mud settling in the job. We generally find, I think, and it doesn't happen every time, but most sessions we find that there's this gradual sort of quietening, deepening, slowing down as we go through the session. And then winding around. So we do get distracted, of course. Sometimes we have to change position. None of those should be seen as errors. It's inevitable that they happen. But those pathways back to that focus of attention, that quietness, again, are well established and accessible to us. Resting your hands down, easing forwards and pushing back. Feeling both the transition, but also the end of each transition in your hips. Again, a moment just to settle. When you go forwards, weight in your feet, a moment just to settle. If this could be described like waves coming in and leaving, then if you watch the waves on the beach sometime, they come in, and then before they recede, they tend to drain down through the sand or the pebbles. turning a little bit. And then in the other direction. And then going around. Very much a feeling of your head swinging around a fixed point. You could think about where you feel your sort of the base of your pelvis on the chair, so you're not sort of shuffling around in the chair. Back the other way. Okay. And then doing again, stepping out and back. And again here, as you step out, when you get to this position, see if you can just find a way to very gently apply a little bit of pressure down through the leg. When I say pressure, really, your leg is extended to get to this point, and then just continue the extension. Don't sort of push with the hip or anything like that. On the other side. And bring the feet. Hands down to your sides. And take your hands, bird folds this way. So your arms are straight out from your shoulders. In that sense, they're in a fixed position. You're not trying to move them forwards and backwards by letting them swing from the shoulders, but rather you've got this rotational movement. You know, they're just sliding around a ball or a round pillar. The rest of the movement is in the movement of your weight, forwards and backwards, in the way that we were doing earlier in the preparation exercises. You see, as I do this, notice that my arm remains hanging straight down from my shoulder. But the combination, of course, gives you quite a strong sensation of movement through your arm. Especially if you imagine moving through water, it wouldn't be enough just to forget about your arm, because you'd have to make some kind of effort to maintain the position. Because if you didn't, then actually you would find that your arm would lag behind. So now, strangely, to make the transition to fisherman cast a net, what we really need to do is to stop that rotational movement and allow the arms to begin to swing. And this is where we see how, if they were in water, they would be held back. And this fluid movement. Keep sinking into the chair as your hands swing forwards. So there's just a hint here that you're about to go back. And here that you're about to go forward. So part of the movement is, of course, your arms swinging forwards and backwards, and that momentum building up. You're not, in a sense, you're not using your shoulder and arm muscles to move your hands forwards and backwards. You're using them to maintain the sort of shape within the movement. The rest of the energy comes from your feet, legs, movement of your weight. And then imagine the ball underneath your arms. You want to feel that although there are these sort of, I described as slight pauses, it somehow doesn't break the continuity, the flow of the movement, either in different parts of each exercise or between one exercise and another. Some of that is down, I think, to our intent. We know what's coming. We're not trying to do it yet because we're not leaping ahead, but we're still actively engaged with the movement. And then drawing apart and pigeon spreads its wings. So what we start to find is that movements blend in with each other rather than having to be an abrupt and sharp change. One more time. And press forwards. Now resting your hands. Last time coming up. Turning your hands out. Going back to the press forwards. One more time. Bringing your hands out. Turning them and polishing the table. Careful with your back here, trying to sink your hip back, letting your back extend. Just imagine your back lengthening out, like you might think, sometimes when you see a cat stretch or something like that, it seems to be through every cell in their body. As you go forward, you can just feel your fingers spreading out a little bit. And as you might notice, my movements are gradually getting a little bit bigger, not because I've decided I need to move more, it's just what's happening. You just observe this process. Remember the term cultivation. It's like when you watch a plant grow, it's taller every day or something like that. I'm not saying this is what would happen every time, but sometimes it works like that. And then turning your hands palm up. So pushing up and pressing down. That same feeling of a gentle lengthening up and down, lengthening and contraction up and down through your back. And then like this. and parting the clouds. Now we're going to go back and do these last three movements as a little sequence. We're going to build up from there. So first of all, facing forwards. And when you do this one, just feel the expansion in your belly, your lower back. And then you change to the wild goose. You start off feeling that same expansion, but it moves up towards your solar plexus. And then for parting the clouds, it's belly, solar plexus, and up to the upper part of your chest, maybe into your head and your fingers. And then coming back, starting the whole process over again. So you just become aware of three areas of your body, feeling the movement progressing up that area. Again, like waves slowly rising up the shore and the beach when the tide is coming in. Now this time, bring your hands around, and as you push up, turn in that lower area, and the whole of your upper body above that area turns with you. You can't turn that far. Try that again, because you can go to about here, but once you go there, you're pulling on your back, and you want to avoid that. But this time, go into the wild goose. You do the same thing again, but because you're opening in the solar plexus, you can turn a little bit further there. And again, be careful of avoiding that pulling feeling. It's only a little movement. And then again, for parting the clouds, belly and solar plexus, and then finally up into the shoulders and down. So the movement progresses upwards, same on the other side. And the turning increases just a little bit through each section that we're looking at. That's just one way of doing it, by the way. So the idea of the section, you could think of layers, shelves in your body. You could even think in terms of each individual vertebra turning just a little bit more than the one below it. Never so much, however you're thinking of it, that it causes a strain, a tightening. You'll find that you can actually really increase the range of your turn as you do this without losing that sense of your root. So you're still feeling your hips sinking into the chair, regardless of which stage of the move that you're on. This is worth remembering, how we get that bigger turning movement and how we maintain the root while we're doing it. One more on each side, one more round on each side. It's worth remembering because we know from NHS figures that when we turn, particularly when we turn quickly, we're more likely to fall. And part of that is just this sense of the body being pulled out of line when we do that. So, you're washing up and then the phone rings and you turn and then just feel yourself falling over, for instance. Those kinds of situations. If we practice this, then we start to change the way that we turn. And we remain better stable, better rooted, better in line or better connected through the body. Because although your shoulders are going out of line, it's not a disharmonious quality. And this time, dragon plucks the stars from the sky. Like all movements, like the previous exercises, it builds from the ground and your lower body upwards. One more on each side. And then in both hands pointing towards each other. Two-way push. Again, there's that moment of stillness between two movements. Add in the turn, hips to belly, belly to solar plexus to shoulders. Turning the other way. Remembering how we build that movement, and we did that before, pressing out to the side. Starting the cycle over again. So this time, coming to the finishing point, as you do, extending one foot out, keeping your knees slightly bent, scooping the seat and looking at the sky. You come back to the upright position. And as you get used to that, you may find, particularly because your legs extended, that you're able to just angle back a little bit. Be very, very aware of the sensations in your back if that's what you're doing. Because if you go back too far, you'll end up stiffening up. But in both directions, there's this nice little sort of stretching feeling through your back here, calves and hamstrings. This time it's changing to grasping tiger's ears. One more round. And then changing over, scooping the sea and looking at the sky. There isn't a significant shift of your weight here. And when you feel a little bit more pressure in your heel as you go forward, that's quite right that you should feel that. But you're not trying to move your weight into the leg. So that means that we're going to need to make a lot more attention to our hips, pelvis. Although all these processes are often associated in one form or another, it's not always done that way. It's not always sort of the same from one year to the next, from movement to the next always. And then change it. Again, that nice lengthening through your spine. Almost like somebody's very gently taken hold of your head around the jaw and just pulled on your head very gently. And then just sit back and again take a few moments to rest, sort your posture out. Take a nice slow deep breath. We're going to go through a little exercise. Some people have done with me at some point, but I don't think I've done it in these sessions for a while. Wave hands like clouds. Sitting in the middle and then turning to your left so that a little bit more of your weight is in your left hip. Hold the ball between your hands, right hand on top, left hand underneath. Move your weight across and turn so you're carrying the ball across. And as you continue to turn a little bit, you rotate the ball. So your weight moves across. There's a little bit of a turn, but this is where we bring in that awareness of how we turn a little bit further without straining. Movement itself is called wave hands like clouds. One more to each side. And just let your hands go. Rubbing your hands together. And again, tapping over your face. Hands are soft, but the tapping is quite vigorous. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. Arm. Other side. Your chest. Belly. Your legs. Pushing one knee up and down. And then around. Good. And then on the other side. And around. Lovely. Standing. Just consider what I was saying earlier about the turning. So this isn't just about whether we fall over or not, but it is interesting, I think, that we have this awareness that you turn quickly and you're more likely to stumble. In the basic Tai Chi posture, we have this sort of formation: shoulder, hip, ankle. We have this more or less straight straight line. And one of the phrases used, and this comes from Chen style Tai Chi, is what I refer to as the three alignments, or the three external alignments, which is hand to foot. So if you're doing something like double-handed, this movement, pushing a wave, your hand is above your foot, elbow to knee. You see my elbow is above my knee, but also shoulder to hip. And sometimes the phrase used is not the three alignments, but the three harmonies. And that's suggestive of something that's a bit different. Not that they're geometrically in line, but that the connection between them is an harmonious one. And since the hand to foot, elbow to knee is there's not an actual physical connection there. Really, that's quite significant when we think about the connection between shoulder and hip. If I do this quickly, I fall over. But if I follow that same pattern that we were using in the chair, I turn in that lower part of the body, then I turn in the middle part of the body, then I turn in the shoulders. I'm actually quite comfortable like this. I don't feel any sense of pulling. If I go a bit further and I'm tightening up, that's when I lose the balance. But I've actually turned further by allowing this gradual turning up. So we get more movement this way. We get more movement in a gentler way in the body. We still allow for that internal movement because the connection between shoulder and hip remains harmonious. It's not antagonistic. If you think of that as the opposite of harmonious. So let's try that standing. Let's just do that three-part exercise using the three familiar movements. First, we'll do a couple facing forwards, and then we'll start to factor in the turn. So again, pushing up, feeling expansion in belly and lower back, and sinking down. And then belly and up into the solar plexus and the middle part of your back, and sinking. And then belly, solar plexus, upper part of your chest, up into shoulders. And of course, eventually that would reach your fingers. And then back to the beginning. It also helps to encourage this awareness that we have of moving from the ground, from below, rather than being, if you like, top orientated. So this time, keeping your hips soft, push up, turn a little bit in the hips, and feel how the rest of your body, including your shoulders, follows that. And then belly, the solar plexus and everything above the solar plexus following, but the shoulders go slightly out of the strict line between shoulder and hip. And then belly, solar plexus, and finally that upper part of the body in the shoulders. Still well connected to the ground, hips still sinking back, change direction, knees soft, feet sinking into the ground. So by applying our attention to these small changes in our body, small movements of expansion and contraction and rotation, we just begin to realize that this is the way that we can increase the range of our movement. Safely, smoothly, maintaining that sense of space within the body for the flow of energy. Try this one more time on each side. Good. And shake out. The areas I chose to draw your attention to are fairly arbitrary, to be honest. You could, for instance, think, sometimes I present it like this, that each vertebra turns just slightly more than the one below it. If you want a visual image, let me just say something like this. I think there's a stack of CDs there. It's this kind of spiraling movement, each section going a little bit further. And the overall range of turn there is quite big, but no one of the CDs has moved too far. So if they'd been connected by, let's say, elastic bands, the elastic bands would have extended, but they wouldn't have been under strain. So this gives all sorts of clues as to how we build up the movement, but it's obviously significant. We're going to be doing Wind Blows the Willows in a moment, and we want to try and apply the same thing there. But first of all, just your forward stance, 1 foot forwards, transferring your weight. You might even try this without your arms. You go into your back foot, turn a little bit towards the front foot in your belly, a little bit more in your solar plexus, a little bit more here. It looks like it could be quite awkward, but actually it's quite a relaxed position. Going forwards, turning belly, solar plexus, or if you prefer to think of it in a different way, that's fine. Don't get stuck on details like that. And we get this sort of expanding spiral. It reminds me of a tornado going up through the body. So this is how we begin to realize that the bigger movements that we see in the arms and the hands are not separate from what's happening in the lower part of the body. We might also find, as you go forwards and turn, it actually helps to raise your heel. So now you can bring your foot in. As you go back and then you turn, that helps your toes come up a little bit more easily. Reinforcing this feeling of a connection between the center of your body, which is where the turn starts, and what's happening not just in the area above the center of the body, but down into your legs and your feet. The front foot now turns out, and because it's turned out, again, there's that little bit of a turn. Just allowing that to happen. Don't make it happen. What we just did was an exercise just to make those connections. All these movements, of course, are always a lot more subtle. But still feeling that little bit of turning, going back. So this is a development of the step in where, and to begin with, your other foot forwards, to begin with, both in the weight transfer and the step in, we would think, we want the upper body to remain still. We want the upper body to sit on the hips is one of the phrases that we use. But of course, it's a nonsense. There is no upper body as opposed to a lower body. The connections are already there. So again, you can begin to just turn in this way. So again, this is a kind of breaking away a little bit from the basic exercise that we do. It's quite good fun. You see if that helps to raise your toes and your heel. Maybe even with the stepping in. This is quite a tricky movement the transfer of your weight, the step, the alignment of your body can all be compromised and compromising. And when we add the turning, of course, it could become even more difficult. So now just stepping through. It doesn't actually matter which way you turn. I was turning in the way that we will be using for Wind Blows the Willows. But the connections are there regardless of which way you turn. Going back. Okay, so have your left foot forwards. Just do a couple of rounds of fisherman castanet just to establish the basic feel through the body. The movement builds in the same way, of course, whether you're turning actively or not. There's that expansive movement up through. There's quite a small little push down through your foot. By the time it's reached your fingers, it's become a big movement. This time, turning into Wind Blows the Willows. Don't strain to lift your arms, just let the natural sort of pulsing movement of your body along with the momentum, the energy that builds with the transfer of your weight and with the turning, just to swing your arms out. Whereas quite often I would say to people, just turn in your center, let the arms do whatever they do. Now, turn in your belly, turn in your solar plexus, turn in your chest. Feel the expansion moving up your body, rather than trying to strain with your arms to get more movement. And then just seeing if you can build in the step with that. There's a lot to think about, so don't be surprised if you're a little bit wobbly, because I've introduced different ideas here, and it takes a while for those ideas to produce a sort of natural feeling. So this is normal. Good. Now have your right foot forwards. Same thing. First of all, fisherman castanet. This relates to the phrase that we use in Tai Chi that 4 ounces will move 1,000 pounds. Again, we can think of 4 ounces in the feet, then 4 ounces in the ankle, then 4 ounces in the leg. That's 12 ounces already. I know that's a slightly ridiculous way of putting it, but if you think of it in those terms, it's not one round of 4 ounces, it's the accumulation of those small movements. Wind blows the willows. So this becomes something that helps us to understand how Tai Chi can work in all sorts of contexts for a whole range of people, how there can be this very strong feeling about it, how we can get these big fluid movements in a very different way. And so that makes it a little bit more accessible to people with different body types and abilities and so on and so forth. It's not the kind of normal physical skill set that we might begin to assume that when we start doing Tai Chi. Stepping in. So of course, when we do the stepping in, we might also try to raise the foot, maybe even with that rotation of the hip. But because you're more stable, you may find that comes easier. But you don't necessarily have to build that in today. I'm just trying to point out that this is how we get to that point, as opposed to what we often do, which is strain with the leg. that doesn't actually help. And then dragonfly skims the water. Take a few steps forwards. Take your time, settle down, turn in your hips, ribs, shoulders, and so on. And maybe even just, if you want to raise the foot, maybe you do that just a little at a time. It can be quite a small movement until you work out how you're doing that, how your body is doing that without straining. And once you've got that, you think, oh, well, maybe I can go a little bit further, and so on and so forth. One more time. Okay, go back to your chairs. So when we say 4 ounces overcomes 1,000 pounds, when we say that Tai Chi, or when some people talk about Tai Chi being effortless, I think that's a bit misleading. When we think in terms of small movements being better than big movements, none of this should be seen as being something that encourages less movement. It's something that indicates a way of producing movement. Of course, we want to increase our range of movement, maintain our ability to step further, to reach further, and so on and so forth. And that's really important. Those phrases point us at a method of doing that, rather than saying that we shouldn't be bothering to do that. But also it works the other way. It's not just about, oh yeah, this is how we get big movements. The reverse of that, the quietening, the settling, also works in the same way. We don't just suddenly go, oh, I'm nice and still, I'm nice and quiet, I'm nice and rooted now. That too is a process. That process reverses. So when we do Embrace Tiger, Return to Mountain, we feel that build up of the bigger movements. But we also feel that bit by bit, cell by cell almost, everything draws back again. And with that, of course, comes that gentle encouragement for our thoughts to quieten and to center, to gather in, to draw in for a moment. Nothing is forced in either direction. One more round. And rest. Lovely. Thank you very much, everybody. So a slightly different take on that, perhaps. So see how you get on with thinking about that.